Here's a nice comment from one of our viewers. Captain Logan, I really like that Superhero Rewind is consistently 2 hours long now, because I have nothing better to do but listen to you ramble incessantly and with no script about movies everyone else on YouTube already talked about years ago. Not a waste of my time at all. Thanks, buddy. Hey, I appreciate the compliment. Wait a minute. I think that was sarcasm. It's in text, so I couldn't tell you were using your sarcastic voice. Now I feel foolish.
Ba, ba, ba. Ba-da-da-da, ba-ba. Ba-da-da-da, ba-ba. Ba-da-da-da. And he's not afraid.
The following is an in-depth story analysis. If you haven't seen this movie, you might want to before listening to this review. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Superhero Rewind Unscripted. I have taken a week off, but I'm back, and with a whopper of a review. We're back to the MCU. This is going to be a big one. I have taken a ridiculous amount of notes on this one. I've got a lot to say with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, and I'm going to try to stay more on book than I usually do. I come in with quite a bit of written stuff for this show, and I go off a lot in different directions, and I talk about things that I maybe even didn't think of while I was writing notes, but I have several pages to go through here, so I'm going to kind of mostly nose to the grindstone this, or we're going to be here another 3 hours. And these have been running kind of long lately. I've really been enjoying it. I hope you have as well. But I don't want to get too insane with it. So anyway, welcome, folks. If you're watching live, thanks a bunch for being here. Thanks for watching after the fact, of course, as well. And thanks for listening to the show anywhere you happen to be listening to it. We're going to be catching things up finally really soon on Spotify. So look forward to that if you prefer to listen to the show that way. And my apologies for not getting there any quicker. As always, just a real quick plug for Patreon. If you'd like to support the show and the channel at large, patreon.com/geekvolution, and the $10 tier gets you access to to being a Patreon producer, a Superhero Rewind producer, and you can get on the Discord there and interact with me and other producers, and you can help us decide what movies we're going to be doing down the road for Superhero Rewind, as well as a monthly chat with me and all kinds of other really fun things, and just the $2 tier there gets you access to Geekvolution After Dark, I guess Captain Logan, no, it's back to Geekvolution After Dark. We've changed the title back, and lots more cool perks on Patreon. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into it. So, the sequel to Guardians of the Galaxy comes out in 2017. This is the movie right after Doctor Strange and right before Spider-Man Homecoming, and originally I was kind of hoping to do Homecoming before at least Homecoming, because there's a whole trilogy of MCU Spider-Man movies out now, and I have not done any of them on Superhero Rewind, so I was hoping to do that before No Way Home. That didn't end up happening, but I was surprised because I didn't remember the sequence. I was surprised to go back and find out that this was right after Doctor Strange, which is the last MCU movie that I've reviewed on Superhero Rewind. So that's kind of neat. I'm sort of back chronological, although there are movies before that I haven't done yet. I really need to get to Civil War at some point. That's the big one, and I'll try to put that on a poll in the not-too-distant future for the Rewind selection board. But anyway, this was not on purpose, because I did put several movies from around this time, 2017, 2018, on that poll, and it looked like Venom was going to win initially, and now we're here talking about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Once again, welcome everybody watching live. I will get to comments and if there are any super chats after I get through some initial notes, but I'm not going to read down everything before I interact with you guys, because otherwise it's going to be a couple hours before I interact with you guys, probably. Anyway, My apologies if I'm a little bit out of it this time. I'm going to try to get a second wind. I was working on this all the way up until start time, so I feel like I've been reviewing this movie all day long, and now I'm finally delivering it to you guys. This is an atypical MCU sequel in lots of ways, and movie sequel in general. It takes place a couple months after the first movie, so it's out of sequence with the other movies coming out, and this is the first time that happens, I think, with the exception of Captain America, First Avenger, which of course is a flashback movie, but this is the first time we've got one that is kind of present day, but we've already seen movies that take place after it, and there's at least one place where James Gunn sort of forgot about that and actually references something, I think with the Stan Lee cameo, that hasn't happened yet, because he forgot what the sequence was, which is kind of amusing. B, it is still off in its own corner of the MCU, so at this point, the Guardians still have not met up with anybody from Earth yet, any of our superheroes, Avengers or anything. The Avengers are not aware of the Guardians yet, and it feels weirdly kind of quaint. Like, it's only been 5 years. It's kind of nuts that it's been 5 years, but it feels weirdly almost quaint going back to a time before the Guardians and the Avengers were intermingling, and Avengers movies turned into also Guardians movies. And then C, so of course that's not going to happen until Infinity War. It's squarely the same kind of movie as the original and doesn't fall into any kind of sequelitis. So other MCU movies, like the Captain America sequels, tend to kind of play around with genre a little bit, play around with tone and mood, and this movie is I want to say more character driven than the first movie, or at least it's about our ensemble cast as a whole a lot more, and there's a lot more subplots, and there's one kind of big central idea at the core of it, and this is a lot of the reason that I have a lot to say and a lot of story analysis, because a lot of characters have a lot of story and their own kind of direction to go with this movie. And so it is in the same genre squarely. It's a comedy that is ostensibly integrating its it's drama and it's comedy, perfectly seamlessly together. I think the first movie does that better. I'm getting ahead of myself, but it's a dramedy before it's a farce, of course, and it's still a space opera film, so it's not subverting any of what that first movie was doing as far as the type of movie that it is, and other MCU sequels tend to do that. It juggles a giant cast really well and makes most of them true protagonists rather than just focusing on one or two and using the rest as supporting cast, which is what the Avengers movies tend to do. It is, in my mind, the truest ensemble cast movie in the spirit of traditional space opera the MCU has had so far. I think this movie is I'll just get right into some criticism out the gate. I think the movie is a better drama than a comedy overall, even though I like a lot of the gags and jokes. A lot of stuff lands for me, but as I said, I don't think it's as well integrated as in the first movie. My favorite rocket line is in this movie, which I alluded to with my teaser. You're supposed to use your sarcastic voice. Now I feel foolish. Too much of the comedy seems to encroach on the story, rather than, and this is a standard criticism a lot of people have of this movie. I feel the same way. I said the same thing when it came out, when we did the spoiler cast. Too much of the comedy seems to encroach on the story rather than naturally forming from it, like in the first movie, which is becoming more and more of a problem with Marvel movies in general. The formula of dramatic scenes I'm invested in undercut by a subversive joke that has become so routine, I'm looking for it every time music swells, or a camera pushes in, or somebody's face or pushes it on somebody's face, or anybody narrows their eyes while giving a speech. It's getting to the point where it's just the standard, so it's not subversive. You're just kind of looking for it. And it's one of those things, kind of like, this is always my go-to example, kind of like Death of Superman or something, where this is a great movie that then ruins everything moving forward, or at least ruins too many things. Like, you don't get Ragnarok and Love and Thunder if you don't have Guardians of the Galaxy, but especially Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. And again, I was complaining about what became kind of the typical MCU humor with this movie when it came out, but I think going back to it, it's maybe even more glaring and irritating to people because they're sick of it overtaking even movies that are supposed to put the drama first and aren't straight up comedies. And again, these are supposed to be comedies first to some degree. Like, you go to them because they're funny, but the comedy is supposed to naturally be born out of the dramatic situations. And I'll give you several examples where I don't think that's happening here, and where you can see too much of the writer behind the script, where Gunn can get a little bit self-indulgent with things, and maybe he's thinking too much about making it a comedy as opposed to just letting amusing things happen. It feels almost like there's a quota for that, even though nothing else about the movie feels like there's any, like, mandates from on high or anything that he's told he absolutely has to do. I'm looking at comments here. Writer says, I hated it. For whatever reason, it didn't ruin Volume 1 for me. And I know a lot of people feel that way already in the comments here, and also we'll see later on with tweet-length reviews. And we've got quite a few of those tonight. This is a somewhat divisive movie. A lot of people feel very differently about it. Some people think that it's a nigh masterpiece, and some folks think it's real middle of the road and real disappointing and not, up to snuff with that first movie. And my feelings on it have changed a bit now, writing analysis about it. And again, I'll get into that as we go along, and you see what I kind of mined from this. But like, I still have a lot of the same criticisms. I still feel the same way I do about what's not working, but it's a perspective thing where a lot of that stuff is not as big of a deal to me now after I'm seeing some of the narrative work, thematic stuff. Not to say that good themes make a movie great. There are character arcs I'm appreciating now on a level that I didn't before, and it's a movie that, like I sometimes have with Rewind, I'm enjoying more as I'm studying it, and it's a thing that I think can be enjoyed on a couple of different levels. So like, I find it largely very entertaining, and it, like I said, a lot of humor and stuff I find really funny, and I enjoy certainly the action in this movie, and it looks spectacular. This is easily one of the best looking MCU movies, and well directed of them, but it's a movie that I was kind of having fun on more of a surface, like, roller coaster level when I saw it in the theater, and it wasn't resonating with me emotionally as much until you get to the end, and then I'm kind of bawling, and I don't know why, because I wasn't with it enough to have that experience, and that was weird. I had that in the theater, and now I'm appreciating it more on both levels, but I don't feel like it's as cohesive of a piece as the first movie, even though it's in some ways more sophisticated in its storytelling. It's certainly more ambitious, it's trying more stuff, but it's also about quite a bit more than that movie is. So we'll talk about all of that. It's wonderfully character-driven. It is an artist's uncompromised vision from start to finish, even if there are missteps in comedy and tone. It is not another assembly line movie. This is obviously, and you don't have to listen to you don't have to look at any special features or listen to the director's commentary, though I did, in order to pick up on this, but it's not one of these movies where a lot of the action is already mapped out for a workman director who then comes in and just directs some story stuff around it. This is an artist who has a vision, who storyboards everything start to finish, and is allowed unabashedly to make what he wants to make. And it's just too bad that more of the MCU movies are not done this way, and that they're so assembly line. And I really don't understand why more of them can't be done that way. It's an incredibly creative and unusual premise. From the word go, when we found out Ego the Living Planet was going to be in this movie, I was like, not just that's a cool deep pull comic thing, but I'm like, that's really risky. How do you even do that on screen? It takes crazy risks. It's not afraid to lose the audience because it grounds everything in recognizable human truths. I think there are a lot of non-science fiction fans that love the Guardians movies because they can put themselves in it so well, because there are Aizen characters that they can relate to, and certainly because they're funny and quirky and stuff. But I think it's both movies so far. I think it's a franchise, and of course the Guardian stuff, even in the Avengers movies that they've been in now. I think it's a franchise that wins people over in a genre they otherwise wouldn't be real interested in. I really like the way Gunn works as writer and a director. He lets his characters come to life in his mind and lets them set the direction of the story. Character-driven fiction. He's not making an outline. I mean, he might be outlining, I don't know. But it doesn't watch or read like he is writing everything to an outline. And the way he talks about it really confirms that. But I can see that on screen, where it feels like these characters come to life and tell him where their story is going to go. And he's not going to force them in places that it doesn't make sense for them to go, because he understands them so well, but also just because it feels like they are like living creatures that the experience that you have as a writer, as an artist, when it's, I think, generally, when it's going well, or at least this has been my experience as a writer, is you have this out-of-body experience where the characters are kind of writing you and you're no longer writing the characters. And that seems to be his philosophy. In his commentary, he mentioned several changes from his original draft, not because of pacing or, like I said, studio mandates or filling an action quota, like the reason an entire subplot was taken out of the Daredevil director's cut to make the incomprehensible, very short theatrical version, but because he would have characters making decisions sometimes he felt didn't ring true. For example, originally Star-Lord trusts his father from the beginning, and it's Gamora who is suspicious of Ego. And when he reversed it, when Gunn switched that around, he said the whole story came together. And then he also mentions that Mantis has a whole monologue about what she feels when she touches Drax, about his family being murdered, and the scene is more moving and she feels more in character when that's removed. I also really appreciate a sequel that just kind of trusts that you've probably seen the original. Like, Volume 2 is maybe sort of watchable if you haven't seen the first one, but whenever you have a 2 in the title, like especially when you have a 2 in the title, I don't know why you'd watch it first. So I don't think, and I don't know if everybody agrees with me on this, but I don't think a director necessarily has a responsibility to make a sequel, especially in an ongoing story like this where characters are evolving as much as these are. I don't know that he has a responsibility to make it entirely understandable and watchable without the first. We're, especially since we're in this place these days where these things are, episodes in a series as much as they're individual movies, although he is still definitely making movies too, so he's walking that line, I think, really nicely. Every decision serves the story and the characters. He approaches his movie like a writer first, which of course I really respect. When he talks about it, he sounds like a novelist, not a script writer. I also respect him, and I'm not saying that the movie is good because I agreed with stuff he said in his commentary. I always have to be kind of careful about that because I don't want directors and writers producers to, I know I always have to stop and give this caveat whenever I talk about director commentaries and interviews and stuff, but I feel the need to mention it again. I think it's important that work stands on its own, and that creators don't need to, and I don't like it when they do too much, explain what's in the thing so that a person can come back and say, well, the director said this, so even if it's not in the movie, that's what it is. Nah, the thing has to be a complete standalone piece. And this absolutely is. It's just he confirms some of my suspicions with his attitude toward his own work, which I really appreciate. And so it gives you some insight in the process. I also respect him for doing what's right for the story even when it's painful for him, like killing off Yondu, which he didn't want to do, but he decided that that was just where the story was going. I can really relate to that feeling. He likes to use Michael Rooker in every movie he makes, and it was difficult for him to kill him off, but he did it because, like I said, it was right for the story. He does, I think, fall in that self-indulgent trap sometimes, but to a lesser degree than a lot of creators who make sequels to surprise hits. The trap of trying to give the audience too much of what they want, or letting your newfound fame and the popularity of the thing encroach too much on it or inform it too much, become too self-aware. He avoids traps like overdoing popular gags from the last movie, and the couple of places where he calls back to things, it's very subtle, and it feels more like characters just still doing what they were doing in that movie, but it reminds you of things they did then because it's the same characters. And he doesn't give too many scenes to breakout characters just because that's the audience, that's what he thinks the audience wants, right? Baby Groot could have really easily taken over. I think a lot of people were worried about that and worried that that was kind of a cynical thing. Some people feel that way about Baby Yoda with The Mandalorian, and with that show, I think storytelling-wise, that's not happening, but of course it's merchandised out the wazoo, and so, you know, the more he gets screen time, the more it feels like a calculated thing. There's none of that going on here. He is, like, perfectly integrated into the story, and his teeth's not taken away just because he's turned into a baby, but he is still cute, and he still does act like an infant or a toddler, and so you, or at least I appreciate and sympathize with him on that level. But Gunn does talk about writing more for Batista this time, and that shows. I feel like Drax sometimes, and I walked out of the theater, I've seen this movie 8 or 9 times now, I still have this, Drax sometimes feels like a completely different character to me, and while I like how much he's mellowed out now, and how much joy he's found in his life since his revenge on Ronan, and I like him as the unlikely, emotionally stable guy that holds the group together, he's a Neanderthal in this one, and I didn't see him that way before. He was not the sharpest tool in the shed, of course, but the whole thing was about his seeing everything literally, and there's almost none of that in this movie, like a little bit, and maybe the idea is supposed to be that he's, grown a lot, and he's spent enough time with Quill and everyone else that he understands some of that subtlety, so in order to still make him funny, we've just got to make him an idiot. Gunn even describes Drax as a buffoon, so it is on purpose, and he fundamentally sees that character differently here than what I think is presented in the first movie. Perhaps just because he's writing scenes he thinks will be fun to see Batista play. That's one of my biggest criticisms, of the movie. Okay, let's get into some themes now. The main thing this movie is about, it's one of those really interesting movies that is about a lot of stuff, and is centrally only about one thing, so it feels very simple, but the more you kind of unpeel the onion, the more human truths come out of it, and it just kind of spirals. I would describe analyzing this movie like a domino rally, where it just keeps going and going and going, and I'm finding more and more as I'm thinking about it. The movie is primarily about pushing family away versus embracing them and relying on them. So the first movie is about a group that becomes a family. I am group. We are group. We are family. The second movie is about maintaining that relationship, and that is harder for our characters than coming together in the first place, which is one of the things that most rings true, I think. Let me know if you guys are having difficulty hearing me tonight. I'm looking at my slider here, and it doesn't look like this mic is as hot as it should be. Testing. Anyway, okay. They are a dysfunctional family at the end of the last movie and at the beginning of this, but then they become functional by the end because they each come to understand their hang-ups, to quote Drax, and overcome some of their trauma and insecurity related to family. And because the whole family has a character arc like that, each of them individually has to grow quite a bit through the film. It's a coming-of-age story for Peter and Rocket, and even Gamora and Nebula to a degree. They have to understand who they are based on what was done to them, but also who saved them from that before they're able to grow up and start acting more like adults and to be able to care for dependents. This is about children who are adults but still too much like children, and that is really, really clear with Peter Quill in the first movie, where he is somewhat infantilized and he's kind of stunted emotionally. But it turns out to be true for some of our other characters as well. And so it's about children who are supposedly adults who by the end of the movie are able to be parents, even if they had really terrible upbringings themselves. It's about the definition of family. It asks the question, is family blood, or is it the people that really care about you? It's about fathers who nurture versus fathers who use their children only to achieve their goals. So Ego sees Peter as an extension of himself. He only created him to make it possible to take over the universe. There is some potential affection there. It's more complicated than just means to an end. He doesn't care about him at all, but at the end of the day, and we'll talk more about this later, Ego is pushing any of his emotions aside in order to get what he wants and what he thinks he needs out of Peter Quill. Whereas Yondu saved Peter and constantly compromised his own interest and reputation to keep Peter safe, even subconsciously. What is ego? Where does it come from? Where does absolute arrogance and conceitedness come from? Peter needs to be recognized. He wants to be famous for his galactic exploits. We established that at the very, very beginning of the last movie. He has his father's complex to a lesser degree. It comes from fear and resentment. So that seems to be the basis for arrogance and perhaps even narcissism. He doesn't just follow in his father's footsteps initially because generically the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. We get that a lot in movies in general. That's kind of a big trope, is like you're going to be your father just because he raised you and for no other reason. Peter repeats the same mistakes because he had a similar trauma to Ego, and of course Ego made that happen. So we create our own hells, but we also create our children's hells, and then they make the same mistakes that we did because it comes from the same place that it came from with us. Vicious cycle. Ego felt abandoned and alone, and he did the same to his son. And so Peter wants the same things his father does, but of course not to the same extreme. So he doesn't want to rule the universe, he just wants some notoriety, some power on some level, which is why when he realizes he has superpowers, he really wants to embrace that. Peter's emotional development is stunted because he didn't have a proper nurturing and upbringing, and he didn't appreciate with Yondu what nurturing he did have, which is totally understandable because Yondu said he was going to eat him. All of that is somewhat retroactive, but it works well enough, I think. He needs to prove he's not worthless, something Rocket just doesn't even think is possible given his complete lack of parental affection. So Peter needs fame and recognition, like I said. Ego, by contrast, is ultimate ego. So his name is, on the nose, on purpose. Ego blames reality itself for his loneliness. This was a thought that I did not have until working on this rewind. The idea that ego is that ego's whole motivation is actually revenge. He literally wants to be all there is because the universe is almost like his white whale or something. He wants to get revenge on it for feeling lonely, for there being no other Celestials to help him find himself. He's the most extreme narcissist there ever can be, even over Tony Stark. And this had me thinking about Age of Ultron. It's somewhat similar in that Tony creates Ultron, which is a twisted version of himself that wants to destroy life and replace it with himself, which he saw as perfection. But the big difference, of course, like this is even more extreme than that, because this isn't an evil copy. This is Ego himself doing it. And he thinks that he is all that matters because he was wronged by nature, not by man, like Ultron, who thinks human beings don't deserve to exist because of what they do to nature and to each other. So there is maybe an insecurity thing there with Ultron to some degree. I haven't watched that movie in quite a while, but I think there is kind of just a fear of, like, what have I gotten myself into in being birthed into this, like, really backwards, in his mind, hellish world run by, like, really inefficiently and horribly by people that seem to him like a parasite. And it's different with Ego because he simply has to be everything because he doesn't trust anything. So it isn't human beings don't deserve to exist and there's a better world I can create. It's revenge. I see it as almost like a suicide, or like a reverse suicide, if that makes any sense. Like, suicide is often seen as a selfish act. Certainly not everyone agrees and in every situation, but classically, it's the reason that in Catholicism, for example, suicides can't go to heaven. It's kind of like that, except instead of killing himself, Ego replaces everything with himself, like the Borg if it was one mind instead of a collective. But it's effectively the same thing as suicide. After all, if everyone is Ego, no one is. And what is the point? If Ego were to succeed, he would be exactly right back where he started from, totally alone. With the exception of the fact that he has Peter, but he kind of sees him as an extension of himself, and again, who he might sort of have some affection for, but by the third act, he's ready to just use Peter as a battery and not even let him be his own person at all. That's not going to be a guy that he's going to talk to and pal around with. So effectively, he's making himself alone because he hates being alone. I find that whole thing really fascinating. Anyway, it is easier to be humble, the movie I think is arguing, when you have other people you can rely on and who love you. If you become totally self-reliant because you're beaten down and you have no support system, you're a broken person, that can make you arrogant, that can create narcissism. Peter and Rocket both display this at the beginning, when Gamora calls them on their arrogance, which arguably gets their ship crashed. Let me talk in this section, too, a little bit about symbols. So, batteries, big symbol in this movie. Really tightly woven narrative from the very beginning. Our characters are trying to get their hands on batteries, and then they're stolen by Rocket from the Sovereign, and then later, Ego is trying to use Peter as a battery. This is a motif, and it's a symbol for using other people and using them up, physically and emotionally. Ego wants to use Peter as a battery under the pretense of a caring father who wants to show his son his full potential, which ultimately makes him no better than the machines in the Matrix, who use human beings as batteries so they can survive. In his mind, this kind of is survival in a really twisted sort of way. And it's interesting, and of course by the end, he dies, so it does become about survival, but because Peter's, has to kill him in order to keep him from taking over the universe. And it's interesting that Rocket was made to be some sort of killing machine, and he's the one that steals batteries at the beginning. Unleashing the wrath of the Sovereign on the Guardians. In a weird way, Rocket is kind of like Ego initially. So insecure, he uses other people as a matter of course, except not as batteries, but again to survive himself. So he doesn't take away freedom and take people's lives. I mean, generally speaking, Rocket will kill if he has to, I guess, and he doesn't care about people, so he doesn't mind if they die, but it's not really a sadistic thing, or really a revenge thing. He just couldn't care what happens to people, and so he steals from them. Again, for survival. Another kind of motif is the Sovereign as our secondary nemesis in this movie. So they kind of parallel Ego, just as a society. Ego sees himself as sovereign in wanting to be all there is, and they are superior, they act superior like he does. They're hunting for batteries, like we discover Ego is, because that's what Peter ultimately is to him. They go after the Guardians not to get their batteries back, importantly, but because they've been wronged. Like Ego wants to punish the galaxy for wronging him. This is another thing that I didn't realize until working on this over the last couple weeks, that there is a pretty clear parallel there between the Sovereign and Ego. And kind of interesting that in a way, at least the way the movie plays it, Sovereign and Ego can almost be looked at as synonymous things. Fathers and sons, obviously. There's a song at the end of the movie called Father and Son. By the way, we're going to break down all of the music after a little while, so strap in for that. The first movie was about a mother and her son, Peter and Meredith Quill, who is barely on screen in that movie and gets just enough screen time in this movie that I can't help but really appreciate why everybody loves her. It's a wonderful performance. Peter and Yondu in this movie, it's about Yondu being his real father in nurturing and guidance. It's also, finally, about the source of creativity and passion, the idea that that comes from the heart and not the head, which is arguably maybe a little bit tacked on and doesn't have a ton to do with everything else in the movie, but it is kind of nice that Yondu has this kind of a bit of insight that he can give his surrogate son at the end, because he never really did that for him earlier, even if I think it's a little bit contrived and forced in, and I'll talk about that too a little bit later. But I guess I go to this a lot, but it reminded me once again of the spelled out moral of the story from the silent film Metropolis from 1927. The mediator between head and hands is heart. Kind of interesting that Ego is a brain. We'll also talk about that. So that mediator is not the heart with the ego. I like the idea that Ego is all brain, like he doesn't have a heart, like he's in the Wizard of Oz, like Yondu and Peter ultimately using their heart. We're back to the heart motif, like with Tony Stark. These movies really like that. I'm also really glad that we didn't somehow have like a giant heart character at the same time. That would have really been laying it on too thick. But their mediator between head and hands is the heart, and there is none of that with Ego. He's all head. I don't love that I said that out loud, but that's what it is. Let's get into character motivations and worldviews now. So my analysis of this is going to be in the context of people feeling damaged and traumatized and pushing people away because of that. So that will be our scale, and everybody falls somewhere on that scale. So let's establish, I should start making graphics for this again. Let's establish our two sides of that scale, shall we? Ego. Now I feel like I'm doing a lecture for like a psychology class. Like here's the ego and the superego. No, we're talking about Guardians of the Galaxy. Ego is on the furthest extreme, so we'll put him over here. of pushing family away, of course, obviously. He keeps up his rage for the sake of vengeance on the universe and the other Celestials, like I said earlier, for not being there for him, as he scraped together a body and an identity. I think it's really important to note that he's given every opportunity for change, even before we meet him, to quit doing this, and I think he's tempted constantly to stop, but he forces himself to, kind of like Batman not getting over the death of his parents. Like he forces himself to keep up that rage. He's the ultimate encapsulation of the pains of self-discovery. He's capable of love, like I said, and appreciates things in nature beyond himself, but he resists the temptation to change, like, Ahab in his whale. He believes the right thing to do, he's got a twisted principle. He believes the right thing to do is to mold the world to his will because that happened to him, because he's afraid of being alone. This all comes from fear. The tragedy of ego, and this is the most interesting thing about it to me, is that as horrifying as that plan is, and what he's done to all the women he tried to conceive with, and to the children that he had, where we discover, this is a thing I'd forgotten about this, we discover that it wasn't that the children weren't viable, like they could have lived regular lives, it was that they didn't give him what he wanted, so he killed them. That they didn't have that connection to the light that, for whatever reason, Peter does. Because these things always have to be really Earth-centric, of course. But the tragedy is, as horrifying as all of that is, he ultimately would be alone because he's immortal. I mean, I said he's got every opportunity to change and he's tempted. And that's true, but even if he settled down with Meredith Quill, she would eventually die, and he would be left by himself. He does discover his humanity, only to be denied it. He has compassion and just ignores it. I think when Mantis says he lies away at night thinking about his progeny, she's not just talking about Peter, she's talking about the guilt he has for all the babies that he killed. And he's weirdly sympathetic, even though he's really terrifying. He's the most extreme version of the sort of outcast the Guardians all are. The right thing to do, I think, if he were to embrace that compassion, would be to live a normal life and then let himself die, and to, sacrifice himself for the sake of his son, or put his son in front of him like Yondu does. Drax then would be on the opposite side. He is all about embracing family. He is the emotional rock for the group, so he's not pushing them away at all. And he's the only character that doesn't. He's even Groot, who I don't have a lot of analysis about because he's a baby, but even Groot is constantly trying to beat up Drax and stuff. They all push one or more of each other away through the movie. He's the stagnant character who sets the example for the rest. He's already had his arc last movie and fully accepts his new family because he had a resolution to his past that they haven't yet. I mean, he's still got to get revenge on Thanos. That doesn't really come up here. So when he's got that in Infinity War, it's kind of weird that he's kind of right back to his vengeance when he seemed to be kind of at peace with all of that. But it's not entirely inconsistent, because I think we get into that a little bit in the first movie, but here he seems very over everything. Some of that also, though, is because he didn't have the same sort of trauma that his compatriots did. He's a little bit more like Batman, where he had a stable and loving family that he lost, whereas a lot of the trauma from the other Guardians comes from the way they were raised, and there was abuse in their past, and that didn't happen as far as we know with Drax. There is the line toward the end where Nebula says, "You're not friends," and Drax says, "No, we're family." There's a line where Peter says, "You're like an old woman," and Drax says, "Because I'm wise," which is played for comedy, but there is some truth to that. Again, he's the anchor, and he represents what they as a group could and should be and kind of will be by the end of the movie. He is the only Guardian that's comfortable with Mantis reading his emotions because he's accepted the family, but also himself in a way they haven't. And I think that's interesting. He becomes an open book once he's mostly put his demons behind him, which also, of course, goes with his blunt culture. All of that is really well realized. So then you have Peter Quill, who's right in the middle until the end of the movie. What's kind of interesting about putting everybody on this line is that our characters are all changing and growing quite a bit, except for Drax, who doesn't have to. And so there's some sliding that happens unusually. So Peter, of course, doesn't trust family and then embraces the wrong family, discovers who his true family is, and then finds the balance between the woman, as it were, and the sea. In the song, of course. When he's excited about his newfound importance, he wants to blindly trust Ego because he has an inferiority complex. You have the line where Peter says, "I finally found my family," and Gamora says, "I thought you already had." Gamora is also in the middle until the end of the film. It's weird that they're kind of right there with each other, even though they're at loggerheads through a lot of the movie. Gamora is the character who seems to most have it together and fulfills that strict mother role, but resists a romance with Peter, being vulnerable with him, and doesn't understand the trauma that she has created for her sister. She was unwittingly more like Ego or Thanos than she'd like to admit, because she used Nebula for her own ends, to gain favor with her father, who in turn was using her, not unlike Ego with Peter. So at the beginning of the movie, Drax is right when he says that Peter is a dancer and she is not, that they're not compatible. That is as much on her as it is on Peter. They both have growing up to do, but she sees him as the emotionally stunted one and doesn't realize that she really has the same thing because of her background with Nebula. So as she develops compassion for her sister, she also starts to realize that what she wants is right in front of her with Peter, just like it was with Nebula, and just like it is with Peter and Yondu. I think it's also important, though, that Peter has to do that much growing up, too, before she's going to consider actually pursuing that. And it would have been too much to have them have a big kiss at the end, or to, like, fully consummate the relationship in any way. I like that, like Gunn even mentions that in the commentary where he says, we thought about having a kiss at the end, it was going too far. I like that it's as understated as it is about that. But anyway, so Gamora was using people for her own ends, kind of like Ego, but subconsciously, because it was a survival mechanism. So everybody has their own motivation and reason for acting in some way a little bit like in Ego, except for Drax. Rocket is, well, and also Mantis, but we'll get there. Rocket is closer to Ego's side at the beginning, and then he comes even closer to Drax by the end. He is mean to his family, also as a defense mechanism, and he almost has a death wish, like he feels worthless. And by the way, I'm doing a lot of character analysis this time. This section is very long because there are so many characters and so much to break down. I feel like I'm doing an entire season of television right now, and also going back to Age of Ultron. This does not feel like a whole season of television. It just somehow gets that much material packed in a story in a really natural way. Gunn is more adept at that than Whedon is. Where I get to the end of watching Age of Ultron and I'm completely exhausted. And I get to the end of watching this and I'm invigorated, but then I write about it and I'm exhausted. So that's better. Rocket wouldn't want to take over the galaxy. He just doesn't care if there's anyone in it or not. We talked about that. Besides the bond that he's forming with his new family, But he's resisting that because he doesn't trust that it will last, and he kind of has that in common with Ego. He needs to look at himself in a mirror through his unlikely pairing with Yondu before he realizes what he might give up if he pushes his new family away. After Yondu sacrifices himself for his surrogate son, Rocket realizes the answer to his problems is right in front of him. You're seeing a pattern there, and worth the risk, just like it was with Peter and Yondu. So then Yondu just is in the same boat that Rocket is, except he's the one, of course, that will make the big sacrifice at the end. He says that he is the same as Rocket, makes a really good argument for that, a thing that I never would have thought of if Gunn hadn't written it in a movie. Of course, you also need more background for him before you would, I guess, make that parallel. Like I said, a really unlikely pairing and a friendship that I'm shocked that I believe as much as I do because it happens so quickly in the movie. But anyway, Yondu pushes everyone away, also as, everybody say it with me, a defense mechanism, but he's already figured out why he does that and sees Peter as his son, so he's got a self-awareness about it that Rocket doesn't have. He's paying for all of his mistakes and he's miserable, but he understands his own psychology to some degree. His redemption brings everyone together, and his death isn't an easy, cheap sacrifice. It helps everyone to see that there's hope for them and for each other, and then they all grow up a little, partly due to his example. He is Ego's opposite because he starts from a self-serving place in ignoring the Ravager code and dealing in kids, but then he puts his son first and forgets about his vengeance on his old family for deserting him and his current family for mutinying against him. I love how, shockingly reasonable he is about that whole thing. So although I guess it helps that he gets to have that whole revenge scene where he kills everybody that wronged him. So he's accepted into a new family, the Guardians, at the end. They don't have to live with him, but, they accept him anyway. And, or at least Rocket and Groot do. But he lets himself die so his son can live his best life. And again, that's what Ego should have done. So then just a couple more here. Mantis is almost the inverse of Rocket. She's hard to put on this scale. She's kind of not even on it because she hardly sees herself as a person. And again, Rocket sort of has that too, but in a vindictive way, which then sort of puts him on the scale. But she can't, she doesn't blame anybody for it. She willingly serves a master, sort of like the slaves with the Collector in the first movie, except there's not any. I mean, her master does have a really messed up, twisted thing, but he's not abusing her. He's not doing anything to her. She hasn't been abused. She's just a pet with a purpose, as she says. So she's just functional, like she's a part of the machinery. And lives entirely for others as an empath. So once again, Gunn is finding ways to integrate background, biology, like societal things, or I should say cultural things, into these character arcs and thematic notions for these characters in a really sophisticated way. She never thinks about her own feelings because she's an empath. That's her job, pardon me. So she never embraces nor pushes away family. She just doesn't have family until she is embraced by the Guardians. It will be really interesting to see how Gunn handles her and if she gets her own full-blown character arc by Volume 3. Because so far she's still kind of just been there in the big Avengers event films. She never considers the possibility of family until her relationship with Drax, another really interesting, unlikely pairing, where you at the end of the movie say, oh yes, of course, duh, but you'd never think to put them together before that, who has experienced extreme loss of family and astonishing acceptance from a new family. So she learns a lot from him. Nebula starts even nearer to the ego extreme than Rocket does, but blames just one person for her trauma, Gamora. So she actually has a white whale and thinks she wants revenge like Ego, tries to kill Gamora, but she gets what she really wants by the end, which is, of course, the love of her sister. She seems to forgive Gamora by the end and gives up on that revenge, at least on her, but, of course, not Thanos. And I guess she weirdly has that in common with Drax. Nebula does, of course, get a complete character arc later on in the Avengers movies, and there's a really cool unlikely pairing with her and Rhodey, if memory serves, in Endgame. I believe all of this is running together now, but because there's so much MCU in my brain. Okay. So that's all of my character analysis. And real quick, I want to break down the family roles. Let's look at this like a sitcom for a second. And these things, I'm going to read this down as it appears by the time you get to the end of the movie, pretty much. But you've got Peter and Gamora playing mother and father even before they formalize a romance. So most of this, before it's even remotely a functional family, these are the roles that they're kind of dropped in, and they embrace them by the end of the movie. Drax is the quirky uncle who gives encouragement and advice. Rocket is the rebellious teenager who loves his parents and his siblings but lashes out as he's trying to find himself. And Groot, of course, will be a more literal teenager and do the same thing by the end of the film. There's a little bit of a circle of life thing with this movie. Baby Groot is the toddler trying to understand the basics of life, not even finding himself yet. He needs a nurturing and affectionate environment, which he finally has by the end. As a dad with small children, that's a thing that really resonated with me with this movie, and from the first time I saw it. Nebula is the wicked stepsister nobody wants around initially, and Mantis is the weird neighbor who doesn't live with the family but understands them better than they understand themselves as an outsider looking in. Okay, let's see what folks are saying in the comments real quick, and then I'm going to talk about the music some. Robert Wilde, I've never heard this. The theory of Peter being a descendant of Steve Rogers is because the actress who played Peter's mom oh yes, I have heard about this, was also in Captain America: The First Avenger. For those who don't know, yes, I forgot about that whole thing. I always thought that was a really silly, sort of fan theory, trying to connect everything together all the time. That's not the only example of an actor that's played multiple roles in the MCU. Small roles, there's not a lot of it, but it happens occasionally, and I think I always thought that was going way too far. I mean, if they decided retroactively that was the case, I would roll my eyes at it. Like, it could be. Like, I guess there's... or if they had decided that before we found out, who Peter's father was, but I'm glad we didn't go there, honestly. Robert Wilde, Mantis personally reminded me of Starfire from the Teen Titans cartoon, which I loved. I did not think of that parallel. That's a good call. Robert Wilde, again, I appreciate Mantis as a character. He wants to talk about Mantis with a different personality that we haven't seen before. Yep, absolutely. I get that comic fans didn't like her because she was different. Well, there's a lot of that, of course. Drax is a very different character from the comics. Gamora, less of a departure, but of course, there are differences. Rocket is more or less as he is in the comics. I don't think anybody is, and I've read a fair bit of Guardians, and I've read the whole Abnett Lanning run. It's been a while, but I've reviewed that, and I don't think anybody is less interesting than they are in comics, or that we're changing things just for the sake of change, or most importantly, we're not changing things to dumb them down because an audience won't understand them, or because they're too weird or confusing or something. It is adaptation before it is straight up translation. And I've always been a stickler about this. For me, as long as it's, I'm not watching the thing going, but this is boring, this is uninteresting, you don't care, enough about your source material to try to at least make it as interesting. When we start from a name and powers, and that's all you get, that's when it's really problematic for me. But when you have a vision where you start with the basics and then you kind of go your own way with it, especially if you're telling a real story that's about people and ideas, I'm a lot quicker to go with you, even if I would have liked, the original thing. Like the big example that I've always gone to, well, besides Constantine, of course, that's an example of a thing where wouldn't it have been nice if we'd gotten, John Constantine, British, straight off the page. Yeah, but it's still a good movie. Like it might not be what you want, but it works better than it has any right to. And the Nolan Batman movies to some degree are that way because Nolan's philosophy on Batman is totally different from traditionally my Batman, and yet he makes the argument, he makes the case, and so I enjoy those films. Okay, let's get into music. I'm going to mention briefly each of the popular songs in the film. When I say popular, I guess I just mean incidental music that were, rock, pop, popular folk songs, things like that are put into the movie. Some of them are really deep cuts that actually were not super popular songs, not necessarily top 40 things, which I appreciate. But before I get into each track, let me just mention that as far as the soundtracks go, I don't think cohesively as an album, this one creates its own sound as well as the first. It's not as cohesive of a thing, but the individual songs here, I think, do create more thematic richness and are used in a more sophisticated way than in the first movie, even though I was so impressed with how those songs get us into Peter Quill's head. Here, they get us into multiple characters' heads, even though they all come from Peter Quill in the first place, because they've all been listening to these songs and they now mean something, distinct and unique to each of those characters individually. They subtly add more context to scenes than you realize at first. They're not just narrating scenes, most of them. It's not always obvious why they're there, or there is an obvious meaning, and then there's a deeper one that you'll find on repeat viewings. I also really like Gunn's process in having the songs come first as he's doing his initial kind of breakdown of what he thinks the story is going to be. He's already picking songs, and he has the actors listen to them during the scenes and also the score. He thinks it's crazy to score a movie after it's made. Like sound and the way it creates tone or adds to tone, helps to create tone, is so important to him. He's got like a symbiotic relationship as a director with his music. And I really like that approach, and I think that it enhances the performances a lot. So let's go ahead and break down each of these songs. Real quick, Robert Wild has a $2 super chat. Ego has similarities to Omni-Man. That's actually a really good call. He absolutely does. I have way too many notes, so I'm not going to talk about that, but I want to. Or I won't talk about it too much, but he's talking about Omni-Man from Invincible, who kind of, that's such a good call, who forces himself to continue to see human beings as lesser so that he can complete his mission, so that he can devote himself to an ideal, even if deep down he has changed as a person. And the difference is, not to spoil too much from that show, but Invincible is, because it's of course not over yet, is creating the possibility for Omni-Man to change, and Ego of course is not going to change, and will pay for that by the end of the movie. Okay, so the main song that is the crux of the whole film that we get right at the beginning and that doesn't bookend the film but keeps coming back is Brandy, of course. You're a fine girl, what a good wife you would be. Ego breaks the lyrics down himself. This is the first and only time that's done so far in these movies. It is analyzed in the film And so there's not a well, I want to say there's not a lot of a read to do on it. There absolutely is, because Ego is analyzing it from his perspective, uh, which is what's really interesting about it. Ego chooses the sea, the universe, over the woman he loves, and wants Peter to believe that that is his nature as well. Ego could settle down and have a family and be happy, like I said before, but he is too angry with the universe and forces himself to keep up that rage. So, and pardon me, because I guess I wrote a lot of analysis about this. Pardon me again. But then I was, when I was writing character analysis, I kind of repeated some of that. So I'll skip around here a little bit. But the pretense, as he is explaining it to Peter, is that this is about passion, like the sea, the universe, not putting Meredith Quill first, is like a man might have for his craft or his career, that takes precedence over his love for a woman. And Gunn, by the way, wrote that from the heart. He talks about this in his commentary too, that he feels that way about his art. He sometimes has a hard time not making his whole life about movie making. But Ego's passion is not romantic. It is revenge. And the moral is that there is a potential balance, as hard as it might be to find, between work and family, passion and love. The key is to move past the fear of failure and anger at the world for taking family from you, which Rocket especially learns to do, and which Ego, again, refuses to do. So if you actually choose adventure over love, like in the song, it can be romantic. The movie kind of twists the song's meaning in relation to Ego once we understand what he's after and the atrocities that he's committed. So if you choose adventure over love, it can be romantic, kind of like Picard in Star Trek, for example, who just never settles down with anyone because he likes the life of being a starship captain too much. But if you choose adventure and push a potential family away, it gives or it becomes a white whale to be hunted and conquered, like in Ego's case, and that is the tragedy. Okay, the movie opens, well, we get that first, of course, in the teaser, and then the opening credits, which are absolutely beautiful and stunning and brilliant, are scored by Mr. Blue Sky, which is a prematurely optimistic song that foreshadows the future. And I really like that for how relatively kind of dark and bogged down the movie gets. I don't want to say bogged down by the middle, because obviously there's still a lot of humor, and you still got that optimism coming from Drax, but there are places where you can't really be sure if the family is going to all become functional by the end, and there's a place in the middle where it looks like everybody might be splintering off. Most of the family is damaged, and their union is their blue sky, but they don't know it yet. What they all need is right in front of them. Like Brandy, its meaning becomes clear once you have the whole picture. So it's hard to tell what Mr. Blue Sky is doing until you've seen the movie. The next song is Lakeshore Drive. So that has the lyric, "There's a road I'd like to tell you about, lives in my hometown, Lakeshore Drive." And I think that's simply about Peter getting back to his roots, but he doesn't know it yet. And so the music is still foreshadowing, and the significance, once again, isn't clear until a second viewing. I've seen some criticism from folks that the songs in this movie are chosen arbitrarily, and that's just factually inaccurate. Even if you don't pick up on what it is initially, or you don't like the way the lyrics of the songs are encapsulating ideas in the film, or you don't feel like it enhances them enough to say that they're not about anything in the movie, is to just not be paying attention, or to not see the movie enough to realize it, because some of it, again, doesn't become clear until later. There's a lot of foreshadowing with it. In fact, almost every song until the last couple are partly, at least, foreshadowing something that will happen later in the movie, telegraphing things. So then you get the chain, which is really important. It comes back again. "If you don't love me now, you will never love me again. I can still hear you saying, you would never break the chain. This is the first song that is actually in the moment and isn't just kind of telegraphing things. It's how Peter is feeling about Rocket, and also how Nebula feels about Gamora. Remember that plays during the slow motion sequence where they're splintering off on the planet where they crash land. They refuse to be better, and they question whether their respective family members care about them. By the end, the chain, as it were, is broken, and it turns out Rocket and Gamora did love Peter and Nebula respectively, and will love them again. But it's also foreshadowing, like the other songs so far, because Ego sticks to his guns and refuses to break his chain all movie. He doesn't truly love Peter now, arguably, or his mother, at least not in the way that counts, and he never will again. Important that it comes back at the end when Peter fights Ego after he smashes his Walkman. And forevermore, I'll just pronounce it that way. Now Peter is breaking Ego's chain of horror, and it takes on yet a third meaning. Well, maybe it's the same meaning as the chain in the other Ego instance, honestly, now that I'm thinking about it. But it's at least a double entendre. Then you get Southern Nights. This has that kind of anachronism that's really popular these days and gets very overused, but I think it works nicely in this movie, where you get like a laid-back, bouncy tune that's supposed to be kind of relaxing music, but we're seeing something horrible happen in front of it, where Rocket's taking out a bunch of Ravagers with his gadgets. It's about a perfect breezy night in nature, but for Rocket, this is the perfect evening. So for us, it's an anachronism. Again, it's getting us in his head. He is seeing this as a wonderful, perfect, relaxing evening. That's how Rocket would love to spend all of his evenings. I also think that there's foreshadowing here as well. Free as a breeze, not to mention the trees, whistling tunes that you know and love so. Rocket is humming along to this song, so it's kind of narrating what's happening, but it's talking about whistling, and then Yondu shows up with his arrow, whistling to then ruin Rocket's perfect night. A lot of these songs start off with a seemingly harmless purpose, and then get perverted by context. Then you get My Sweet Lord, which is kind of interesting. Not in the romantic sense. It sounds like a devout religious man who wants to meet his God. And really repetitive lyrics, very few lyrics. It's inverted in this context because Peter's name is Star-Lord. So it's not about Peter, I don't think, wanting to meet his father because he doesn't trust him. Ego wants to meet Peter, but as the song says, it takes so long. But the song still weirdly is about a god, because Peter will turn out to be part god. So again, it's kind of foreshadowing. Then you get Come a Little Bit Closer. Another upbeat love song, therefore irony as people are brutally being murdered. Again, really popular right now, but it also, from Yondu's perspective, is a very happy occasion. And it's a song about a man who tries to get with a girl, finds out she has a lover, and runs away before he gets the tar beaten out of him. So I'm reading this as Yondu is the man taking his girl back, in this case his crew, from Taserface, who becomes the speaker in the song weirdly. It's the first song that is not foreshadowing anything, at least that I'm noticing. The next song is Bring It On Home to Me, which I think is calling back a little bit to Fooled Around and Fell in Love from the first movie. That is the romantic song that Gamora and Peter are going to dance to as Peter tries to convince her that she is a, quote, dancer. This time, she is not trying to stick a knife in him and actually does dance with him. The lyric is, if you ever change your mind about leaving, bring it on home to me. This one, I think, is pretty surface and clear. It's about the unspoken thing that Peter is talking to her about through the whole movie. Gamora isn't planning on pursuing a relationship, but he is hoping that she will change her mind. Then you get the very odd Wham Bam Shang-a-Lang, which is about discovering true love just as you're losing it, and that foreshadows Yondu's death, so we're back to telegraphing again. The first verse, but then comes a time when you're ridden with doubt. You've loved all you can, and now you're all loved out. Oh baby, we've been a long, long way, and who's to say where we'll be tomorrow? Well, my heart says no, but my mind says it's so. Heart and mind, that we got a love that isn't a love to stay. So it's a romantic context initially, but in the context of the movie, it becomes a song about a son and his father. And again, that is right around the same scene where Yondu says, "Do you think I use my head to fly this arrow?" Interesting that that lyric is right in front of that. And then the last verse of that song, "And now that it's said and we both understand, let's say our goodbyes before it gets out of hand." That's interesting. Like, these guys are accepting each other now, but like, how long could they really live together? You know, that's kind of a question. So, bye bye, baby. I'd really like to stay, but we'll remember the best time in our life. That's foreshadowing his death, his funeral, the way people will remember him after he's gone. Father and son, of course, and this is the song that, in the scene that brings me to tears every time I see this movie. I've become a huge fan of this song. I had never heard it before this movie. I do a lot of karaoke. It's become one of my go-to karaoke songs. A wise father and a wet behind the ears son expressing their respective perspectives on. I don't love that I wrote it like that. On where they are in life. The father gets old and goes away. The son grows up and goes away. Son becomes the father, like Peter does with Groot. Wants to be a better father than Yondu, but also appreciates Yondu now. It's not time to make a change. Just relax. Take it slowly. Peter and Gamora don't fully get together by the end. There's time, and I really like the subtlety of they just take each other's hands. There is plenty of room for growth after this. I'm hoping that I'm won over on the whole second Gamora thing by the third movie, with what the Avengers movies did with it, but at least where we're at right now, it's very nice. And I'm so torn on that because I love her death scene so much in Infinity War. And then the last song in the movie is over the credits, Surrender, by one of my least favorite bands of all time, Cheap Trick, although this is one of their better songs. I always felt like Cheap Trick was just a glorified cover band, and my dad loves Cheap Trick. He's obsessed with them, and he made me, or didn't make me, but he took me to a concert of theirs a few years ago. I kind of begrudgingly went and didn't realize that Peter Frampton was playing with them. So it was Cheap Trick and then Frampton, and I was kind of bored through Cheap Trick, and then my dad was kind of bored through Frampton. It was really funny. I digress. This one is pretty straightforward. Mama's all right. Daddy's all right. They just seem a little weird. Surrender, but don't give yourself away. It's all right there. And that song is really appropriate for the end of this movie. Trust your family, but be true to yourself. It is the perfect song for Peter's and most everybody else's character arc. Okay, we are well over an hour in, and I'm going to start breaking down here in a couple minutes our good things, bad things, and get into some questions. Let's take just a couple minute break because I've been talking a long time, and I'll be right back, folks. Maybe I'll feel free to leave a couple comments while I'm taking a quick break, and maybe I'll read a couple comments before I get back into the analysis. Hope you guys are having a good time. I certainly have. I certainly am. Pardon me. Give me just a couple of minutes. Thanks, guys. All right, thanks for your patience, folks. I am back. Let's see. Miguel Rodriguez says, calling it a nightcap. Love this analysis, but I've got a machine design class tomorrow. Definitely catching up on this when I can. Well, thanks a lot for being here late at night. Don't be too tired for your class tomorrow, but really appreciate you. Hi, Bag. How you doing, man? Hey, I'm caught up to live now. Epic. Robert Wild, superhero I was made possible thanks to White Castle. The White Castle shtick is back. Robert Wild also says Cats in the Cradle is another song that could have definitely fit somewhere in this movie. I agree with that. I think Father and Son kind of fits the same purpose, and Cats in the Cradle might have been a little too obvious. There aren't any songs in this that are like super overplayed that I feel like I, growing up, heard way too much on classic rock stations and such, although there were maybe one or two songs from the first movie that I knew really well, and obviously that's going to be, subjective and up to everybody, just what their musical tastes are and, their upbringing, what they listen to. A lot of folks and a lot of you guys who are much younger than me probably don't know even some of the songs that I did in each of these movies in the first place, but there were also songs that I had never heard before too, which is really nice. There's some deep cuts. Anthony Cabrera, $1.99 super chat. Meredith has a good taste for music, very thematic. Yeah, that's the sort of conceit, the sort of contrivance I can get behind. I am an absolute hypocrite, completely a walking contradiction when I am complaining about contrivance and convenience, right? I think it's impossible to be totally consistent about that. And it's just case by case, and whether, sometimes it's just personally like whether it works for you, if there's too many stacked on top of each other, or if the conceit is worth it. It's like, yes, it's contrived, but it creates so much thematic richness, gives you so much detail about the character that it's worth it. And stories, and I've said this before, are, by their nature, of course, contrived. Somebody made it up. It didn't actually happen. Dictionary definition, someone contrived it. That doesn't, of course, excuse when it feels too contrived. Like when it's cheating, but I can much more get behind these songs are playing that happen to have a lot to do thematically with what is going on, than I can like narrative cheats where, a phone call happens that stops a person from getting killed just right in a moment, for instance, that sort of thing. And there are some conveniences in this movie that are a little too easy that I'll talk about when I get into bad stuff, but those are the kinds of gimmies that I will usually give a movie because it creates an artistic richness to a thing. Anyway, so this time I broke down jokes because I didn't want to fill my good stuff and bad stuff sections too much with I like this joke, I don't like this joke. And again, humor is very subjective, but I wanted to provide examples for when I think the humor in the movie is working and when it isn't, because I'm criticizing the film for having some intrusive comedy in a way I didn't think the first movie did. So here are some jokes that I liked. Groot still freezing when Drax sees him dancing, which he does at the beginning of this, and you have in the after credit scene in the last movie. That's a running gag that started at the end that doesn't feel like just a callback, but a thing that it makes sense he would keep doing. I found that amusing. The joke about skin being the same thickness on the inside as on the outside. The whole Amulax Harbulary batteries thing. And I think I mostly like that joke just because Gunn came up with names for those that are so memorable they stick with me. It is one of those things that makes Drax too stupid, and I don't really like that he does that. It's almost like in that moment it becomes a like Star Trek parody or something, where you have characters that in science fiction in space operas that so easily can regurgitate technobabble the first time they hear it. Like, it's almost an Orville joke where he hears Amulax and he says Harbulary, and it sounds nothing at all like what was just said. It's inherently hilarious. I don't like who it comes from, but I like the joke. I maybe don't even like that it's in this movie, but I like the joke. So I should have put this in both sections. Rocket, once again, you're supposed to use your sarcastic voice. That is on par to me with my favorite line of his from the end of the last movie, when he says, "But you don't understand. I want it more. I want it more, sir." Remotely piloted sovereign ships with arcade space shooter sound effects. That's another thing that some people might think is going too far and is too, like, I don't know if self-reverential is the right word, but too, like, I don't know, almost meta or something, but something about that is just inherently funny to me. Like, I can't explain why I like it, but it works for me. The line delivery from the Sovereign Extra that says, "You suck, Xylac," that is a great line delivery. You suck, Xylac. The whole empathic session where Mantis says Peter is in love and Drax says he must be so embarrassed, it shouldn't work. It's kind of sitcom-y, but the performances are so good that they win me over on it. And that was one of the big things that was in the trailers to sell this movie. Kraglin has this line, I don't even think it's supposed to be a joke, but I wrote it down because it always makes me laugh. Just the absurdity of this, where he just offhandedly tells Nebula, "You know, we got a whole box of hands." Every time that cracks me up. Baby Groot bringing all the wrong things when Yondu asks for the prototype Finn. This is one of those things that you either find it funny or you're not, or you don't, pardon me. I love random humor like that, and it keeps going, and some people think it goes on too long. I think it has to drive the joke home. I don't think it works without that, and I think the payoff at the end with the related gag of Groot not knowing which button to push on the bomb, it sets that up wonderfully. And I guess the idea is, because he has sort of a mini character arc of his own as a toddler, where I guess the idea is supposed to be if he concentrates hard enough and starts to his brain is still developing as a little kid, right? And so he's starting to realize when things are heavy and when he has to really pay attention, and so finally he makes the right call. And maybe that's a little bit too easy at the end, but both of those gags I really like just on their own, and maybe even more out of context. That was another thing that the trailers sold the movie on real hard, was there's one trailer that was pretty much just that scene. Hey Drax, do you have any tape? And then don't push the death button. I thought that was brilliant advertising. Just take a scene out of context that is funny and works without having any idea what's going on. And it was in the third act. It's only like 20-25 minutes from the end of the movie. And people already know these characters. The first movie was popular. You don't have to explain anything about who anybody is. You don't have to do that rundown of these are all your characters again, a bunch of a-holes like with the first movie. You just go, there's going to be this part where Groot is not going to know which button to press, and it's hilarious out of context. It's kind of like a short film all by itself. I love how that plays. I think it's great. The running gag of Rocket stealing cybernetic body parts never gets old, and that goes all the way into Infinity War, and it's really funny there. He's going to wake up tomorrow, and he's not going to know where his eye is. Again, a lot of these things are funny enough on the page, probably, but are so much better with line delivery. I like Groot's child logic about hats. The face effects on Rocket and Yondu when they do 700 jumps in space are pretty funny. I don't get why they don't suffer any ill effects for that. It's set up like, oh god, this is a problem, and then, nah, it's fine. I guess people really can't handle that many jumps. Yondu says we're not supposed to do more than 50. It's not healthy. They're fine. No problem. Maybe it gives them cancer. Maybe that'll be... that will happen to Rocket and Groot in the next movie. We'll find out that they have cancer now. It took a while. it lingered, and Yondu's dead now, so he'll never know that he was going to get cancer from that. Baby Groot, I already talked about that, not knowing which button to push. Do you have any tape? Again, I love how long that goes, partly because it's just realistic. People have those conversations in moments like that. It's humor that comes from a real place, and I don't get why Drax would know what Scotch tape is, but whatever. I'm Mary Poppins, y'all. Again, a joke that I'm sure plays for some people and doesn't play for other people. It's a lot about the line delivery. Once again, is he cool? Really sells it. And it doesn't feel like a blatant, cynical Disney nod. And part of that's just because I know Gunn was not thinking Disney when he wrote that. I know he was thinking, well, he's going to be coming down like this. He looks like Mary Poppins. And he almost took that joke out. And I'm really glad that he didn't. I think it's great. And then the whole bit at the end with the Zune plays both for comedy and drama. Jokes I don't care for. And again, some of this is just me personally, and some of it is, I think, just stuff that doesn't comedically resonate with me. And I can't necessarily explain why. I'll just tell you jokes I didn't like. And some of it is, this is intrusive. This is not naturally born out of the drama and the nature of what's happening. Drax's sensitive nipples, the payoff for that is good at the end, but that doesn't make me laugh. The potty humor during the Sovereign space battle, I really could have done without, and I found that uncomfortable, with my kids. I'm a prude about that stuff, I'll admit that. Root isn't ripe is notorious. Nobody I've talked to likes that joke. It doesn't work as a running joke. It's one of several points in the movie that drama is undercut, or something shocking is undercut by an intrusive gag that feels like you can see the writer in it. And that's kind of the biggest culprit in the movie. You guys all know what I'm talking about, right? With Nebula, where she finally gets a bite of that root after Yondu has been shot, and he loses his fin, and she goes, oh, it's not ripe. There's a wah-wah at the end of that, right? That bit is also weird, because in the theater, I thought Yondu was dead. It plays like a death scene. It looks like his head explodes. You don't actually see his whole head explode, obviously, but you get a spark on the guy's head, his eyes almost roll in the back of his head, and then he falls backwards. And I'm like, oh my god, they just killed Yondu. I guess he was not as important as we all thought. And then he is this huge central figure for the two character arcs. Aisha's carpet getting stalled out and the music stopping, that's another one of those intrusive things that I think is pretty notorious and not a lot of people cared for. And it feels like that is the single joke that Ragnarok builds its foundation on. That whole movie is just that joke over and over and over again. Drax thinks Yondu and Peter look exactly alike, but he's not supposed to be stupid. I don't understand that. It's nonsensical. If you could have a character, if you brought in a new character that kind of had that, where they just looked at everything really weird, I might kind of buy it. Let's say you had a character who was not humanoid at all. They might look at Peter and Yondu and go, oh, they look the same. They're both men. They got 2 arms, 2 legs. They're related. And then Rocket's like, they're blue. But I don't know why Drax does that. And a lot of my not great jokes are that kind of thing with Drax. I can't decide how I feel anymore about the self-awareness of the taser face joke. Let me break this down, because it's hilarious and I really like it. But in the context of this comic booky world, I don't know how I feel about it, because most everything else is played straight. The movie is not too good for this kind of over-the-top comic book material. Almost nobody bats an eye at Ego's name, even though he clearly is a larger-than-life egomaniac, and his name is Ego. But we've got the class to not have anybody come out and say, oh yeah, of course his name is Ego. Except there is one line that Rocket has where he says it's a day for dumb names. But that's it, and it doesn't even go into why it's dumb. He just thinks it's a dumb name, which isn't going too far in my mind. But the problem is, it's also all relative, because Taserface is a dumb name, even in the context of a comic book superhero world, I think, in my opinion. So like, I don't know, I have alarm bells that go off. I have like a spider sense every time somebody in a comic book movie goes, that name is dumb. But the problem is, to always call a movie on it would be to say that nobody would ever think anything is dumb. And they would. And different people would feel differently about different things. So I can't decide if it's a problem, because I think Taserface is a relatively dumb name, even next to Ego calling himself Ego. And that sort of thing. I don't like Taserfaces. It's too adorable to kill. Again, it's funny, but it doesn't seem in character for him. It's like a universal constant of the universe, like encroaching on him. And then one of my big misfire moments, and I've always had this, is Drax yelling, "Mantis, look out!" after Mantis gets hit. It, once again, undercuts a moment, and it's just nonsensical. I mean, I already didn't love that moment, because it's kind of that money shot where everybody's standing around for a picture that nobody took, to quote Plinkett, and that's kind of a trope. But then she's got to get knocked out, like, oh, you're not expecting this because we got this big dramatic moment, and the movie's too good for that kind of thing. Once again, it is weirdly a better drama than a comedy, even though I'm laughing at a lot of it. It's a very strange experience. Okay, I'm going to blow through some good stuff. I like a lot about this movie. I have very few bad things, but they're mostly, and you've heard most of them already, larger issues. So some of this I've already mentioned. Tightly woven narrative from beginning to end. It's visually stunning. Intricate, imaginative landscapes and architecture, particularly on Ego's planet. I won't get into the background on that, but it's really interesting, like, how that was all designed, if you listen to Gunn talk about it. So I would really recommend that commentary. Throwback to early science fiction pulp and comic art, as he talks about in his commentary, and all the way down to making, because this isn't comic book, making the brain what Ego actually is in the middle of the planet. That's so old school pulp. I love the, like, magazine cover stuff. I love that. And that he was allowed to get away with that kind of, insanity. I love the sound design, orchestral and incidental music. Both is good or better than the original, and is, once again, meticulously designed, I think. Every character has a clear motivation. I know what everybody wants and why. One of the most spectacular, entertaining, and technically impressive opening titles I have ever seen. In the theater, I found myself going, I don't know how exactly this was shot and the CG was integrated. It's really, really lovely. Generally, the CGI, speaking of that, is well integrated and seamless. So much care is taken in making the action, especially space battles, feel real and cinematic. This was a really good big screen experience, and I'm glad I saw it that way. Rooting, and I mean, I see all the Marvel movies in the theater, but sometimes I'll go and I'll be like, I didn't really need to see that on the big screen. This is not one of those things, and most of these movies I don't have, like, snapshots in my brain of the first time I saw them in the theater. This, I have that. And actually, both of these I have that with, which I think is a testament to them as big screen spectacles. Rooting the movie in reality from Gunn's own personal experiences. Again, a thing that I feel like I would pick up on some even not hearing him talk about it. But he talks in his commentary about how the Dairy Queen thing is not product placement, and it never read product placement to me. And that's the thing that people have complained about, because people are very sensitive to product placement in the same way that I am often sensitive, like I said a minute ago, to anybody in a movie complaining about, in a comic movie, complaining somebody's name sounds dumb. Oh, I recognize that sign. Somebody must have paid for that. There's kind of a chicken and the egg thing here, because if you want to use a product that exists, you do have to get permission, or let the company that you're doing that with know that you're doing that, generally speaking. And sometimes it's not because they paid for it and it's encroaching on the film. Sometimes it's because we're all surrounded by products and trademarks and intellectual property that people own is all around us and a major part of our lives. So for Gunn, Dairy Queen was an important part of his like teenage young adult years, and it was an image that encapsulated the whole ego relationship with Meredith Quill, and that's why he put that in there. And somehow it just rings truer because it's a small town recognizable thing, I think. So I like that he does stuff like that. The de-aging makeup on Kurt Russell looks pretty good, and I didn't realize until I listened to that commentary, I got a bug in here, that the same thing was done to a smaller degree on Laura Hadrick playing Meredith Quill also. Like I said earlier, I'm really impressed with that actress for what little time we spend with Meredith Quill. I still like these people even before the family is more functional, and when they're jerks or unreasonable, there are consequences to that. I want to mention real quick my kind of screen relationship with Zoe Saldana, who is an actress that I used to not care for and thought was not a very good actress. I didn't care for her as Uhura in Star Trek '09 initially, and then I saw her in other things, and I was like, I'm sick of this actress showing up and everything. I don't think she's a very good actress. And then going backwards, I keep finding her in older movies from like the early 2000s, and she's got these like the bit or small parts where she's really solid. And I'm finding retroactively that most things I'm going back and watching her in, I'm liking performances I didn't like previously, because something clicked with me with her in Infinity War, because I think she's spectacular in that movie. Like, this is overstated, but I, in the theater, felt like that she gave a nearly, like, Oscar-worthy performance. Probably not, but that was my feeling in the theater. And then going back to this movie, I'm like, oh, she's really come into her own and found this character. I like her a lot now, and I kind of want to, if I ever find a convention that she's at, I want to go and meet her and apologize for not liking her in movies before. I love how happy Drax is now, even if I don't like how dumb he is. He laughs constantly, and it's really infectious. And I just like how much he's grown from the last movie. I just wish his foundation hadn't changed as much as it seems like it did. This is a perfect blockbuster in my mind, a roller coaster that exists to serve a compelling and intimate character-driven story, not the other way around. Gunn is right when he says it's a mainstream blockbuster made like an independent film. Matthew Bass, thank you so much for the super chat, and I'll get to that in a second. Few movies of this scale explore ideas and characters as thoughtfully, thoroughly, and effortlessly as this one does. They don't stop and smell the roses, give us downtime and contemplation, and aren't nearly as dialogue-driven as this movie, which is kind of a surprise. I just think there's a brilliant balance between spectacle and human introspection. I think it's the best thing about the movie. Matthew Bass, $20 super chat. Thank you so very much. I really appreciate the support. Unpopular opinion. I don't think Yondu's arc works. Oh, interesting. Feels like we retcon him and the... he says Reavers, but he means the Ravagers. Reavers is Firefly and Serenity. To make him more sympathetic, Peter and Yondu needed more screen time together for me to buy the father-son thing. Okay, I don't wholeheartly disagree with you on that, is the thing. And when I get to bad stuff, I'm going to talk about retroactive changes from the end of the last movie. I have this disconnect thing with this movie where this is a piece... It's very complicated, right? Like this is a piece, I'm buying all that stuff, but I have to kind of ignore what we're told or how things feel in the last movie for it to work, and that is absolutely a problem. You're not wrong about that. The problem is it's more interesting than what we had. So I just wish it felt like it was there from the beginning. I don't want to give it entirely a pass for that, but it's the sort of retconning where I can't help but go, but it's more interesting, so I'm still enjoying it and more on board than I feel like I ought to be. Like, continuity with these things really does matter, and when folks say good storytelling is more important than good continuity. I feel like, and we talk about this on the channel all the time, and I don't mean to keep harping on the same things, but since you brought this up, I'll make this point real quick. It is an oversimplification to say storytelling trumps continuity. You know why? Because continuity is part of storytelling. Within a story, you need everything to make sense. You need to not suddenly retcon a thing you were told 40 minutes ago. Well, if you've got multiple episodes in an ongoing saga, what is really the difference between retconning something 40 minutes ago and retconning something in your last movie? Well, nothing, except that they are self-contained stories about the same character, and it's a case-by-case thing where if the story stands alone enough, it's easier to ignore what came before, but we're building on these characters so it is an ongoing story, even if the movies also exist apart and have a beginning, middle, and end unto themselves. So yes, it is absolutely a problem. It doesn't wreck the whole thing for me because it's like a scene or two in the first movie, and I could see. Here's the problem with this kind of thing. If you like it, what you want to do, and folks will do this, of course, is, and people do this with everything, what you'll want to do is go back and reinterpret those scenes and try to explain how it could work. But if it was clearly not the intention in the first place, and retroactively you can kind of fit a triangle peg into a square hole, it's still a problem. So does not completely wreck it. I will get a little bit into here in a little bit with when I get to bad stuff. Why you are right, but it does not completely wreck the piece for me. I like the Sovereign set. I think that is a really pretty set that they built. Location, it's a fully realized living and breathing universe. Gunn knows how everything works and doesn't stop to explain everything. Characters play it straight, live in the world, and we figure out the rules as we go. Like the jumps that let them travel great distances, even though apparently 700 is fine. And you get things like space candy from the first movie that comes back here too, and now gets a logo on Peter's shirt. To be fair, I didn't know that that was supposed to be for that until I heard Gunn's commentary. But I don't mind things like that where, it doesn't have to be spelled out. I mean, I guess if it isn't enough in the movie, you could say, well, how do I know that is for that candy? I feel like there's something that makes it clear enough if you're really paying attention, but I might be wrong about that. The animals Peter kicks around and uses as a microphone in the opening of the last movie come back too. I think those are called the Orlani. I think I wrote that down right. I like the quirky design of Ego's egg-like spaceship. It looks like something out of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. There is some really nice textbook setup and payoff here, like Stallone's speech. What's Stallone doing in this movie? About the Horns of Freedom and the Colors of Godord. He says that'll never happen when Yondu dies, and then he dies and he's redeemed, and all of that happens. It's really nice. There is, we talked about this earlier, respect for source material while taking liberties and adapting to serve the story. That's my opinion. I like the uncertainty of Ego's motives. On first viewing, I think it could go either way. So when Gamora says, if he ends up, I didn't pick this up until this viewing, if he ends up being evil, we can just kill him, I'm not immediately expecting that to be foreshadowing, but of course, it ultimately is. There's a couple of points where we get a slow motion walk that calls back to the one in the first movie where the family is first starting to come together. You get that kind of money shot walk. There it was about the family starting to form. Here, the first one that we get on the planet, I mentioned this earlier, is where they crash. Birdheart, I think it's called, is about them separating, and maybe they'll be splintered forever. If you don't love me now, you'll never love me again. And then there's another one that is a more direct callback on the ship when Yondu, Rocket, and Groot kill Taserface, the big Ravager ship. And that's a more direct callback. And this time, they've bonded the way the Guardians did in the first movie and in a similar setting. And that's the kind of callback I'm okay with, because like it doesn't feel like it's fan service. It feels like it's serving the same purpose, and it's doing something thematically interesting with it. So it's inverting it the first time we see it and going, maybe this isn't a family anymore. And then when we do it again, it's Rocket finding a new member for the family, and then they'll all come together by the end. I buy Yondu and Rocket's fast friendship more because of how much fun they have together in that scene. That whole thing is so fast, it shouldn't work for me, but it does. There are ideas that would seem absurd out of context, but play for drama in this movie because the world is made real even though it's ridiculous. Like David Hasselhoff's picture in Quill's pocket. And the bit where Ego even turns into Hasselhoff, who Gamora calls Hasselfrau. There's some really good, I'll try to rush through this. There's some really good visual storytelling and subtle information in body language, like Gamora smiling when Drax guesses what Mantis' antennae are for. I talked about the giant brain thing. I love that. I like the foreshadowing of the way Yondu will sacrifice himself. This is a thing I didn't pick up until today. Taserface kills his men in the same way, suffocating and freezing them in space. They sacrifice themselves for Yondu, who is their family, just like he will for Peter. For them, it's horrific. When he does, it plays as a beautiful moment. That's great. I like Drax's speech about the benefits of being ugly. It's kind of profound. People love you for who you are, and beautiful people never know who to trust. That just rings true. People can be fickle. I like that a possible romance with Drax and Mantis is addressed, because Gunn has to know the audience is wondering if that will happen as soon as they come together. So I like the idea of that is stamped out in a comedic way. I don't even like the type of thing you are. The skulls of Ego's children are haunting. I like that. I like the moment that Peter breaks out of his trance and immediately gives up his godhood because Ego killed his mother. It brings it right back to the first movie. His memory of his mother is everything to him. She defines him, and that makes this man not his true father. It isn't, again, not generic. It's not just, you killed my mom, like the Iron Man thing in Civil War, which I know a lot of people like that, and it resonates with them. I always thought that was too easy. This works better to me. It's, I thought you were my family, but you destroyed my actual family. It's so much worse than the Civil War thing. All subplots converge by the end, some of it a little bit too easily, but I like the structure of it anyway. Groot being crushed by the planet is heartbreaking. He's a really realistic toddler. I love the performance that we get out of a CG creature. I love how dramatic and comedic "you shouldn't have killed my mom and squished my Walkman" is. That thing is like his mom's soul to him, but the line delivery is really funny, so it works on both levels. And I said this earlier, but Yondu's funeral is one of the most genuinely emotional moments in the MCU to me. So when I see the first Guardians, I tear up at the end, because I talked about this in my rewind for that movie, of course, but the tape motif resonates with me because my mom made me mixtapes, and that just brought me back. And I don't always tear up now when I see that. I have like streaming tears every time. It doesn't matter how many times I see it. It's weird. I feel sappy saying that. But I don't know. I don't know why it affects me on that level. I can't even tell you exactly what's resonating with me. It's like this primal thing. Like half an hour before I started recording, I finished my note watch for this movie. I've seen this 3 times in the last 2 weeks. And I took probably 8 or 9 hours to get through a 2-hour and 17-minute movie because I had so many notes I was taking, so many things to say. And even watching it broken up like that, where I'm pausing to write things down, I still had tears streaming down my face. It's like a Pavlovian thing. It's like if I hear that song and see those images and hear that dialogue, that's the effect it produces. It's crazy. It's crazy. Not a lot that does that to me. That, every time. Okay, so, here's my not-so-good stuff. Once again, humor issues. Written to interrupt the story sometimes. This is a little thing. I don't know that everybody's going to agree with this. I think it's a little weird that Jackson 5's I Want You Back isn't at the beginning of this movie or in here just real briefly somewhere. Just because that's part of Volume 2. Like, you get the mixtape. This is a total nitpick, but this kind of thing just bugs me. You get the Volume 2 mixtape at the end of the last movie, and then that song is on it, but it's put on the Volume 1 vinyl record and everything else in real life. And then in this movie, it's not on that soundtrack because it wasn't in that movie, but this is Volume 2 and it was on Volume 2. You know, so like it should be there. Again, Drax too much of a dunderhead. Another one of those kind of convenient things that I'm of two minds about. Like, it's maybe a little too easy that Aisha brings up Quill, the Sovereign Queen, brings up Quill's heritage just because he's about to come face-to-face with Ego. But then it's natural enough for her to bring that up because of her ability to see genetics, and structurally it's sound because it's establishing the main ideas of the movie, so that's one that maybe I give a pass to, but it did take me out a little bit on like a second viewing, where I'm like, oh, he's about to meet his dad, so 10 minutes before that happens, we gotta have somebody ask him about it. Peter being part god and thinking he's got everything he ever wanted is great for the story, but it is a little retroactive. And that goes to Matthew Bass's point. Now the reason he could hold the Infinity Stone in his hand from last movie is because he's part god. But the point of that scene in the previous film is that it took the whole group supporting each other to hold it for even a few seconds. So I guess he could have just done it alone. And he doesn't seem to have powers apart from Ego, or like he never discovers that he can do anything out of the ordinary, but he holds an Infinity Stone in his hand for a few seconds, and that's because he's part god. I don't really get that. I think that's a blatant retcon. Ego reveals his sinister plot to Peter at the exact same time Mantis is telling Gamora for the sake of drama. I hate that in things. It's a really irritating trope. One thing does not lead to another. Like, everybody finds out at once so that we can transition into the third act and have this dramatic intercutting where they're both finding out at the same time. It doesn't work. And it goes on for a long time, which makes it even more kind of glaring to me. Like, why is Ego stringing Peter along in the first place? Like, maybe the idea is supposed to be that he's just kind of grooming him and buttering him up, but at the point that he starts telling him everything, especially like, I let all these kids die, all these women. Did he kill the women? I keep assuming that he did that, but I'm actually not sure. He put a tumor in your mom's head and killed her. I don't feel like at that point he should believe that Peter is going to go along with all of this any more than he would have, like, a few, minutes in the film before that. It just happens because this is the time that Mantis is going to tell Gamora about it. And I also don't get why Ego's not worried that Mantis might tell people about his true intentions and his true nature. So that's an issue. Yondu's line delivery is really weird. This bugs me every time, and I'm probably the only person on the planet that is bugged by this. But, because I know people are going to say, Cap, this is really nitpicking. It is, but it bugs me every time. It always takes me out. So, Rocket says to Yondu, "You don't know anything about me," or something to that effect. And Yondu responds like, on the set, the line delivery was different than the one we actually get from the voice acting. So Rocket's line is something like, "You don't know anything about me." And Yondu's line delivery is, "I know everything about you." Like, it's like he came up with the idea in the first place. The inflection is wrong. Like it's weird. "I know everything about you," not "I know everything about you." It's not the right line delivery. It's weird. And I think Yondu sometimes drifts too far into sappy territory. We do this a lot, and it's not as bad as a lot of other things, and I can tell that Gunn is trying really hard not to let it go too far. But where you get a really like hardened, grizzled character like this that wants to look real strong, doesn't show a lot of emotion, and then at the point where we decide they're going to open up, it's like the floodgates open and they're a different character. It's not quite that far, but I don't think that's a character that throws around the word love, and I just wouldn't even put that in his mouth. And when he says, I don't use my head, I use my heart, even though it gets cut off, it's too far for that character, I think. I'm not sure, to the super chat, Yondu's true reason for not delivering Peter to Ego matches the end of the last movie. That's clearly not what it is there, and it has been changed now. How could Yondu know that Peter's powers work at all like his arrow? Like, why are you making that connection? I like the sentiment, but it's too much of a leap from the character's perspective. One is technology. One is a supernatural ability he just found out about and has no knowledge of. So he's like, do you know how I move these arrows around? That's gotta be how your energy making statues powers work. Like, don't think about it too hard. Just do it. You don't know that's how it works. Maybe it takes immense concentration. Maybe he has to have the whole thing mapped out in his head before he can make anything. You don't know. And also, and again, like, I guess he probably doesn't know this yet, but, like, Ego is a giant brain. So, like, it only stands to reason that the powers would work with your like, synapses. How would he know? The fight with this has always bugged me. The fight with Ego, the planet at the end, and this is also a part that's a little bit too CG heavy, where that does take me out a little bit. It feels like a video game boss fight. He's got this dialogue that I'm just imagining being repeated over and over again while you, the player, are like flailing around trying to figure out where to hit him and get his patterns right. It's like, come now, Peter, I know this isn't what you want. What kind of a father would I be to let you make this choice? Like, we've all played the boss fights with a character that keeps rambling like that. Soon, Peter, we will be all there is. Like, it's like a Lego game boss battle. Okay, finally, I have questions, and not as many as I usually do, because this movie is pretty tight, but I do have some questions. And I haven't gotten at all yet, and then I promise I'm almost finished. I haven't gotten at all yet into the convoluted nature of the mythology with Ego. This stuff took me so out initially when I first saw the movie that I think it's part of why I didn't appreciate a lot of the intricacies in the character arcs in the narrative. And so it doesn't bug me as much as it once did, because I liked the character stuff so much. But if you're not running with the premise, it makes it much more difficult to appreciate that stuff. So some of you that buy this stuff will think I'm nitpicking when I bring this up. And some of you will go, yes, Cap, that's why I don't care about these characters as much as I should, because I'm not buying the initial premise in the first place. I've had people try to explain it to me. It still doesn't make sense to me. I'll get to it chronologically when we get there. First of all, this is a question I had the first time I saw it. I think maybe it makes more sense now, but I'll bring it up again just in case. Why does Ego choose to look older? Like, I assume it's for Peter's benefit. Like, he could look any age he wants, but he probably wants to look like he's old enough to be Peter's father. But he wouldn't have to, and I'm not totally sure if that's the reason, so I used to wonder about that more than I do now. Is the monster at the beginning from another universe in what we now know as the multiverse? Like, we're told that it's coming in from another dimension, or is it in a different, definition of dimension, like in Doctor Strange? And this is the next movie after Doctor Strange, where we're starting to broach this idea, but we don't know what the multiverse is yet, or what it will turn into later retroactively. So I'm still really confused about what realms and dimensions are before we get to the multiverse. When Gamora realizes Drax is still tethered and flailing outside the ship at the end of the Sovereign battle toward the beginning, how would she think he was going to get back inside? She's really surprised by this. She's like, oh my god, he's still out there? Looking at how fast they're moving and how difficult it is for them to bring him inside. Why is she surprised by that? Like, of course he's still out there. Like, you had to work really hard to get him back in the ship. How do you think he'd get in there? I love how straight most of the comic stuff is played, but I don't know why Ego would be so on the nose as to name himself that. Once again, what is Stallone doing in this movie? I like him in this a lot. It's just crazy that he's here. Why can't Michael Rosenbaum play a character that doesn't have a glass head so I can tell it's Michael Rosenbaum? Okay, this is a big one. Why did Ego have such a hard time finding Peter? So we did good stuff, we did bad stuff, and now we're into questions, and some more bad stuff is in questions because this is where some criticism comes from. I get the idea that nobody really noticed Peter until he became a hero last movie, and I like that it's building on that joke that nobody knew who Star-Lord was and then made it a plot point, like, who? That's kind of fun. Now they do, that feeds Peter's ego, and then Ego finds him. Like, I like all that idea-wise, but like with his resources, Ego really should have been able to find him out. He does not seem to be in enough of a hurry to find him, and he should be really motivated given that Peter has a, well, okay, I was going to say Peter has a finite lifespan until he meets Ego and goes to the light, but I guess if the idea retroactively is he could hold an Infinity Stone in his hand so he's immortal and he can't be killed very easily, that maybe the idea is he's not in a hurry because Peter is immortal and will live forever, but I'm actually not totally sure about that. And that's part of my issue with just the way the powers work and his connection to the planet and the light and everything is, I think Gunn knows how it all works in his head, and I think he thinks he gave us enough, and he did not for my understanding. It would be dangerous if Peter can die, for him to wait very long because of Peter's lifestyle. And then retroactively, there would be no point before Ego dies that we could actually be worried for Peter's life, which is kind of funny. But part of the problem also is that the galaxy feels too small, with Nebula being delivered to the Guardians by the Sovereign, and Yondu hired by the Sovereign to kill the Guardians, which of course he doesn't plan to do. But, like, they're all finding each other really easily, but Ego can't find him. I don't know. It seems too easy. It seems very convoluted. No, I'm sorry. Contrived. It's very contrived. That's the word. Is Rocket really strong enough with those tiny arms that he could punch you into unconsciousness? Are we supposed to think Yondu might already be dead when the first fin gets taken out? I mentioned that earlier because it really felt like a death scene the first time I saw it. This always bugged me too. I complained about this in the spoiler cast all those years ago now. Why does Drax call Ego's planet stupid? Because he was so awed by it initially. Remember the balls, the bubbles of different colors, and he's laughing and he's having such a great time, and like he's got a childlike sense of wonder about this planet. And then 2 scenes later he goes, what do you see in this stupid planet? And I'm like, that does not go with what continuity, folks. Okay, so this is another big one. Is there a range to Peter's powers? Does he have to be close to the planet to use them? If not, why hasn't he discovered his powers before now? It seems, again, very retroactive. Like Gunn is going backwards and trying to figure out how to fit everything he's given us already with what he wants to do now. And again, nature of storytelling is contrivance. It's okay that he didn't already have all this mapped out, but whatever he comes up with really needs to match that first movie, and it doesn't enough to my taste. Again, it's good for the character arc, but it's too easy. He finds out he's immortal, and then his father dies, and he's automatically just a human being, so he can be humbled by mortality again. And so that he has something to give up when taking out Ego, and because if he's too powerful, it's going to be difficult maybe to tell stories, or tell the kind of stories that Gunn wants to with him after this. So, like, I don't know, Infinity War, like Thanos is beaten really easily if he's still a god. But all that is just really easy. Okay, so you kill him, and then he doesn't have his powers anymore, even though he's half god. They we're trying to explain it with the whole he's connected to the planet and the light thing, but why though? I'm getting ahead of myself, but he's not an extension of Ego. He's part celestial. I don't know that I'll ever understand that whole thing. Peter asks Ego why he had Yondu, a criminal, pick him up in the first place. Ego sidesteps the question, and he's lying in that whole scene, so whatever he says, we wouldn't be able to trust anyway. But, really, why did he pick Yondu? This backstory was clearly not thought out last movie, and again, we're not convincing enough moving backwards. Some of these I've already talked about. Here's a question. If Baby Groot is a new being born out of the original Groot, and not the same Groot reborn, was he born knowing his language, or did somebody have to teach it to him? That's just a question. If you're Taserface, just imagine for a moment, it'll give you nightmares, but imagine for a moment that you're Taserface. Wouldn't you destroy the prototype Finn if you're not going to use it yourself? Just in case Yondu escapes. And then when Yondu does escape, and Taserface realizes that the Finn is missing, he goes, he's got it! Like, he was kind of expecting that might happen and worried about it. So, like, he probably should have gotten rid of that. If Thanos pulled Nebula's brain from her skull, as Nebula says, she goes down a litany of cybernetic enhancements that have been made to her, and violations. And she says he took her brain from her skull. Is she still the original Nebula? She has a different brain? And that's kind of interesting since, like, Ego's a brain. Why don't brain and brain, what is brain? Why don't warning bells go off in Peter's head when Ego says, only we can remake the cosmos? Like, he's just with him. He's like, okay, yeah. And, like, I get that he's all excited about his, like, Skeletor, Pac-Man, Heather Locklear statue, but I still think maybe that's the moment he should be like, wait a minute. How does Peter as a battery work? This is the big one that I've never understood. And it's related to all the things I've already been complaining about. So let's go through it very quickly. I still think it's super convoluted. Ego needs him to give... Okay, so I've got pronoun issues here. Ego needs Peter to give him more power to take over the cosmos. Everybody with me so far? But Ego is the thing that gives Peter his power in the first place. So Peter uses the planet to power his abilities. Because Ego says as long as the light exists, right? Which in turn somehow give the planet more power. So, like, I'm not an electrician or, like, I don't know anything about science. I need someone to explain to me how this whole thing works, because this is what I'm imagining. This is not a perfect metaphor, but this is what I'm imagining. You put your double A's in a remote control car, right? And the batteries, like only have power because the car itself is somehow giving them power. Like, they're dead batteries, but when you put them in the car, it functions. But the car itself can't function at its highest operating level without the batteries. Even though it's a self-powered car. Like, it's not a perfect metaphor, but that's what I'm imagining. I don't get it. If Peter is part God, why does he need Ego as a power source? Again, he's not an extension of Ego. And it could have maybe been done that way. But I imagine the reason that it isn't that is because if he put, like, a part of himself in Meredith Quill, and then she had a baby, and first of all, I don't know why that wouldn't just automatically work to do what he's wanting. But if it worked that way, then you would think that when you kill Ego, Peter Quill would also die. But I don't totally know why that doesn't happen anyway. I do if he's not an extension of him, I guess. But that proves that he can't be, and like I said, I just think it's this kind of, like, convoluted working backwards thing, where these are the reasons that all of those decisions are made. When you add it all up together, it does not really make a lot of sense. Batmad says the human body produces. Well, that's true, but I guess I'm not sure what point you're making with that, because it just watches like, I see what you're saying. That's a good point. Maybe that's enough to explain it. But the problem is, A, Peter never discovered he had powers before. That's weird. And 2, it really watches like it's the core of the planet that gives him any power in the first place. But maybe that's not the idea. It just seems that way. I don't feel like it's well explained enough. Dagon Spear, who says ego and the light aren't separate things? The movie, I thought, made it pretty clear that the light is ego. That, like, it's the center of the planet. Ego is the planet. And when we destroy the planet, we destroy the light. And even if they are separate things, like, I think the point still stands. I don't know. Batman, so maybe Peter can manifest his own light eventually. That's not how it's explained, though. I don't know. There's just not enough there. Because I also still don't get why destroying ego then would make it so that Peter is now just a human being and does not have any power at all of his own accord. Batman then says, I was making a loose Morpheus reference. Really? I dropped it because it was a reach? Oh, okay. This is a devil's advocate kind of argument. Plushy DX, ego activates Peter's power. He's like a key. Again, it just doesn't watch that way, though. It seems like it because... And the reason that I think I know for sure it isn't just that. That could work. Oh, you're saying that even if it is... Because I was going to say, it's the... He says that as long as the light exists, he's immortal. That's where his powers come from. But you're saying that the idea is if he meets ego, then his powers activate. Okay. I guess if you're full celestial, you have your powers from the get-go, but if you're half celestial, you need another celestial to activate it. You see how I'm thinking it's kind of convoluted? I don't know. Anyway... other things. When Peter says he sees eternity, I love this moment. He goes, I see it. Eternity. Does he mean the Marvel character Eternity? I just wonder if that's what he's saying, which we now have seen in Love and Thunder. Or does he just mean in general? Why does Nebula respond to Smurfette? You have no idea what he was talking about. Smurfette. Yes? Why would Drax know what Scotch tape is? How many ships does the Sovereign have? If they could send another giant fleet, why didn't they do that when they lost their ships the first time? Or did they manufacture them in the interim, and that's why they waited this long to attack? Or was it just because they couldn't find the Guardians, but they had this whole other fleet on standby? Or can they just, do they have a big factory where they build ships, automatically? Ego. If you kill me, you'll be just like everyone else. How would Ego know for sure what would happen to Peter if he died? This is a question. Okay, this is the last thing, and this has always driven me absolutely nuts, and people have tried to explain it to me, and it just, I don't think there's an explanation. It does not work. I think what happened here is the script and the special effects people were not talking to each other, and somehow Gunn never caught it, and he doesn't talk about it at all in the commentary, which kind of surprised me. Kraglin, in the mid-credits, in a funny scene, has the prototype fin. And we see Peter give him the arrow and say, I think Yondu would have wanted you to have this. But immediately after, Peter, this is one of my favorite nitpicks in anything now. Peter hands Kraglin, played by Gunn's brother, the arrow. And we cut immediately to the body of Yondu being completely disintegrated. And on top of his head is the prototype fin. We watch it disintegrate right after he's given just the arrow. But then in the mid credits, he has the fin on his head. It's a prototype. There's only one of them. Like, you can't explain that. It does not make sense. And I think it's hilarious. Okay, I am going to get into tweet length reviews now. We have quite a few. These are from our Rewind producers and also folks at the $5 tier on Patreon, patreon.com/geekvolution. This is a perk you get even if you are not a Patreon producer. And we've got, like I said, quite a few this time, probably 10 to a dozen. So I'm going to read these real quick. Here we go. And then I'll get into my rating. And I'm sitting here waffling because with some of the things I've complained about, I'm not sure if I'm going to go as high as I was going to. I'm so on the fence right now between two scores. Dagon Spear, maybe... Oh, he already deleted. Okay, I won't read your comment since you didn't want me to read it, since you got rid of it. Okay. Christian Ogden, in Unpopular Opinion, but I really don't care for this movie. No, you're not alone. This is a divisive movie. The action scenes are enjoyable, the performances are charming, and Ego is a rare MCU villain that doesn't completely suck. However, for every joke that's funny, there's a gag that goes on way too long and falls flat. This is a little long for a tweet length review, I think, but I mean, it's not too terrible. Nebula and Gamora becoming friends again felt way too rushed, and the long-lost family member secretly being an a-hole is way too cliche and has been done too many times. Okay, that's an interesting perspective. I appreciate some of the character development, Yondu being one of the 3 MCU movies to die and not be resurrected 10 minutes later is enough to keep me from flat out hating this movie, but considering the first Guardians is a top 5 MCU film for me, and the sequel is 100% skippable when it comes to rewatching the Infinity Saga, I just can't bring myself to say it's worth more of my time. 2 out of 4. Wow. Well, he is strongly opinionated, and, I mean, I agree with some of your criticisms, but so Saqib Tariq, the humor drags it down, especially Drax, who makes a cheap gag every minute. The action and soundtrack are great, as ever. I also appreciate that it feels different to the first movie. The emotional core relationship between Peter, Yondu, and Rocket keeps me coming back, though. It has my favorite final scene in any comic book movie that gets me every time. Agreed. 2.5 out of 4. And how nice is it that the funeral really is the last scene? I was surprised by that. Malik Myers, the first Guardians of the Galaxy film was great and felt like a breath of fresh air, and while there's a lot of character work in the sequel, it feels hollow and artificial in a way journeys of Iron Man and Captain America through the MCU don't. Despite Peter losing Yondu and going through the shattering disillusionment regarding his real father, this movie feels skippable. Interesting that that's a criticism that keeps coming up. It feels skippable. And, he continues, and the reconciliation between Gamora and Nebula feels a little rushed. I think this is part of the same, yeah, it is. Like much of James Gunn's work, it's very colorful and bombastic, but this was the this is where, the overabundance of comedy issue with the MCU starts for me. You and a lot of other people. A lot of it is funny, but there's also a substantial amount that's not, and it feels like the movie is often begging you to laugh. Really found his groove again with the Suicide Squad, but this was a bit of a misstep. It's a fun watch for sure, ultimately a lackluster sequel, 2 out of 4. Thank you guys for these. Joe Turner, while a bit less cohesive or funny than the first film, Guardians 2 makes up for it in character work. The cast is well balanced and show a level of vulnerability you'd never expect from an MCU film. Combine that with stunning visuals and a far better antagonist than the first film, and you get one of the best of the MCU, 4 out of 4. Wow, so winging love from that review. And then David Crabtree, while the novelty of its comedic tone had lessened from the... See, we're all over the map with these. From the first film, even more so now, the performances managed to elevate the material. The cast continues to have excellent chemistry, and even though I know it's coming, the ending gets me misty-eyed every time. See, I'm not alone in this. 3 out of 4. Michael Gulick, an enjoyable way to kill 2 hours, but not much more for me, which is a shame because I love what is going on thematically. You're seeing a theme here. The parts that do work are solid, but the plot feels more like a TV episode than a movie. Interesting. It also has some notable examples of humor intruding on pathos, but hey, at least it's not Ragnarok. 2.5. Chewbacca's Lover, one of the better MCU films. These and the Ant-Man films are less special because they all have to be comedies now, and he doesn't give a rating. That is a fair point. Connor Nielsen, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, sees James Gunn, the writer, more comfortable in his now-established series, and Gunn, the director, taking ambitious leaps in his storytelling. I greatly enjoyed this movie, even more than the first, but admittedly needed a few viewings. Right there with you. There is still a part of me surprised to see the Marvel Studios logo attached to this. 3 out of 4, an excellent point. MattBat68, who's there with us in the comments, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is the beginning of MCU's humor issues. Agreed, having learned the wrong lessons from the success of Volume 1, it doubles down on being a comedy, but without the writing and craft of the first one. 2.5 out of 4. And then TH1 says a near-perfect movie with wonderful visuals and excellent writing. Just immediate contrast, really fighting that last review. 3.5 out of 4. And finally, Austin the Day Ghost. Guardians 2 goes back and forth with 3 other MCUs for my favorite. But favorite spelled like he's a Canadian, because he is. But I think it's technically their best. It's the best looking, and it's actually about characters and ideas. But some jokes go too far, so it's like Ragnarok. He put that in quotes. I'm not totally sure why. I think he's referring to criticisms of this movie. Even though most of that is just Act 1, 4 out of 4. Yeah, Austin loves this movie. Okay. I'm going back and forth, like I said, between a couple of scores with this, and it's just, it's your whole package versus thematic and character arc stuff, right? Like, I can't give your plotting a complete pass. Like there are again conceits and gimmies and stuff that you have to give genre things very often, but what you have here is some just straight up retconning, which is really messing with me a little bit, because I would say character plus plot equals story, and the character bit of plot should serve character, and so that makes plot secondary but not irrelevant. And if the plot is not consistent and not serving character enough, then that does mess with my ability to appreciate, what is happening in your film. So, boy, I was really pushing to a 3.5 on this, and I gave the first Guardians a 4, because I just think, with the exception of the kind of sappiness of that ending, and it not having, I'm just reviewing that movie now, a real great antagonist, I still felt like it was nigh perfect, and it almost doesn't need an antagonist, so that's not enough to bring it even down from a 4 for me. This is flawed enough and cheating enough, I think, that I don't know if I can go all the way to 3.5. Like, I want to, because, like, it really is resonating with me more and more. And obviously, it was very interesting to dissect. But just because there's, a lot of analysis you can do doesn't make you a movie, at that 4 level. So, yeah, I think I have to go to a 3. And I hate that. It's going to be a really high 3. We'll go ahead and rank it. But, yeah, I think I'm in a 3 place. And some people are going to applaud me for that, and some people are going to hate me for that, because this is a divisive movie. Although I feel like I say that about everything now. But yeah, so let's look at the 3s over on Letterboxd and try to rate this. It's still going to be in the top 40, 45. Give me just a second to get my monitors set up here. Okay, here is the list. At the very top of my 3s, we have Avengers, and then we have The Mask, and then we have First Avenger. So this is going to be pretty easy, because I immediately want to put it above First Avenger. I mean, I like that movie, but that ending is kind of rough. I love Ninja Turtles, but I want to put it above that. I like Deadpool, I want to put it above that. So the question is, does it go above The Mask? Because The Mask is is wonderful, and I don't have a lot of issues with it. And I think it almost maybe even deserves a 3.5. The more I've watched it since that review a million years ago. Would I put it above Avengers? Like, I think Avengers maybe still holds together as a piece better, even if this is more ambitious and a little bit more thought-provoking. But, like, you know, you gotta compare things to themselves. I think for now I'm gonna sandwich it in between Mask and Avengers. That's where I'll put that. And I forgot to make the thing, so I'll do this a little bit later. But it's gonna go in the 37th spot. It's gonna go right under Avengers, I think. Austin's gonna boo me, but that's where I'm at with it. That is black. Hold on. Sorry about that. Okay, so finally, I gave it a 3, and that's where I rank it. And now I want to say thanks as always to our Patreon producers. I'm going to go ahead and read the Rewind producers, everybody at the $10 tier and above. Say thanks to you guys, and then I'm going to reveal next time. Well, that's a great sentence. It's getting late. I'm tired. I'm gonna reveal the movie for next time. Next week, I'm gonna review another superhero movie. You know what? I'll go ahead and do it now. Next week, I'm going to. So we did another poll for the Rewind selection board, which is, of course, again the Rewind producers, and the movie that was selected this time from a list of sequels. I specifically picked sequels for like smaller franchises that are older and that I have never seen. All 4 of these were movies I've never seen before, and it's gonna be RoboCop 3. RoboCop 2 I did maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, not too long ago in my head anyway. Finally going to do RoboCop 3, and I've never, like I said, I've never seen that. I've heard that it just kind of keeps degenerating, and at that point, it's sort of a Saturday morning cartoon, which I'm kind of in that mood, so that'll be fun to do. Hey, look behind me. It's the entire superhero movie library, or at least mine. Like, not every superhero movie ever made. I'm, of course, working on that. I don't have everything yet. But I got it all in my backdrop, all behind me. I'm really happy with how it looks. And I'll go ahead and announce this now. People have been asking me, now that I've done this, to go ahead and do another collection video. So that's going to be the next thing after RoboCop 3. So in 2 weeks, if all goes according to plan, I'm going to take another break from reviews and do a little collection video. Well, I say little. It'll take a while. But I'll do a collection stream. I don't know how I'm going to set up cameras, how exactly I'm going to do that. I got a couple weeks to figure it out, but we'll do a special on that. So RoboCop 3, and then the superhero and comic book movie collection. Thanks to all of our Superhero Rewind producers once again, including Wendell Jones, Thorne Jones, Nathan Jones. None of these guys are brothers or related in any way. Miguel Rodriguez, Michael Gulick, who I think was here tonight, Matthew Brody, Kareem Roberts, Jacob Schneider, Damon Begay, Checkers the Inventor, Adam March, Thomas Edgehill, The Day Ghost. I'm sorry that I didn't rank your favorite movie high enough, Austin. Super Billy, Stone Gaspin, Michael Martin, Matt Bat 68. Thanks for being here tonight, man. Joshua Gilisano, Jajira, Joe Turner, Hot Soup, Goofster123, Elliot Slater, David Crabtree, Chewbacca's Lover, and Blake. You guys are fantastic. I really appreciate everybody for being here this evening, and I'm going to go ahead and get going because I'm tired of talking, and I read my like 7,000 words of notes. I will see you again real soon. Tomorrow night, Captain Logan show at 7. What am I talking about? 7 o'clock. It's really late. 7 o'clock tomorrow night, the Captain Logan show. Not sure what the lead-in topic's going to be yet. I'm between a couple. We'll see if any news happens. But come and hang out with me. It's been a couple weeks. I miss you guys. And every time I take a week off, I don't do this a lot, but it feels like I've been gone for 2 months. I'm going to go ahead and get going now. You guys are great. Thanks so much for being here. I was Captain Logan, and have fun. Watch some superhero movies. Bye, everybody.